Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? My name is Carolina Chavez, and I am broadcasting live from Miami. Today is Wednesday, July 15th of 2020. Well, we're going to continue. Last week and the past weeks, we've been talking about second-hand clothing. We started around 4 weeks ago speaking about the civil rights movement that brought us to Africa last week, because in Africa, the second-hand trade, the clothing, it's a very, very big industry, and we spoke about the good and the bad. So right now, we're gonna give some other perspectives and also a little bit of history. So the world trade of the second-hand clothing has a very long history around. It's been recorded probably since the year 1200. And until the mid 19th century, the second-hand clothing trade was vital as a way to acquiring clothes. So only through industrialization, mass production, and the increasing incomes was the general public able to buy new clothing instead of second-hand, but this is only until the 19th century. During the colonial days in Europe, second-hand clothing was exported to the colonies, and locally charity shops arose that catered to the poor. Since the Second World War, the second-hand clothing trade worldwide has grown considerably, with the environmental problems being of great relevance, and also observing the pollution that the fashion industry is causing. People are learning more about the effects, also to be more respectful with the environment, and other things that have caused, among other things, to the second-hand trade to become more popular, fashionable even. Also, the internet these days has pushed that trade much more than in years before. So I'm gonna explain a couple of definitions, because we're gonna use these words throughout the show today. So second-hand clothing is, it refers to the clothing that has been owned by somebody else. The second-hand market, this is from the marketing perspective, is the set of customers who want, can, and are destined to buy or sell a certain product. I say according to marketing because in my country, for example, the word market means a place where you go and buy stuff. So according to marketing is the demand and the buy and sell offers. Okay, the second-hand retailers include physical stores such as vintage shops, boutiques, consignment shops, charity shops, thrift stores, online auctions, and individual exchange methods like garage sales, flea markets, exchange parties, swap parties, and all of that. The vintage shop or boutique is typically operated by a private owner who sells clothing that has not been recently designed. This is clothes from another era, from a completely different fashion, right? So the stores buy these items from vintage fairs and then sells them at a premium. The consignment store is a store that takes a percentage of the sales in return. The stores generally sell the clothing in good condition and return these items to the owners if they are not sold after a specific period of time. They specify how long these clothes stay in the store, and if they don't sell, then they are returned to the owners. And the thrift and charity shops are places where donated items are sold. These places are generally not for profit, and the proceeds go from the sales to charities like the Salvation Army or Goodwill. We mentioned last week that Goodwill, from the sales of all of the items they can sell, they have these programs to employ people and help communities that are in certain disadvantages. So this is a non-for-profit thrift or charity shops. Now, about the history of the second-hand trade, the use of vintage clothing began around the 1980s, but the consumption of the second-hand clothing has been registered since the 1200s, influencing culture and the economy in the many European cities, main European cities. So we're going to review historical records of second-hand trades in Florence, Venice, Edinburgh, London, and Madrid during this period of the pre-industrial revolution, during the industrial revolution, and post. Okay, so pre-industrial revolution, here the exchanges of second-hand clothing originated in the guild markets in several cities. So, because newly made items were a luxury item available only, of course, to the wealthy who could pay its highest cost. The second-hand clothing was, however, sold at a reasonable price to the general population, which couldn't afford to buy new clothes, and was marketed throughout the entire population. The Guild for the Second-Hand Clothes Trade was founded in the year 1280 in Florence, Italy, where the rigattieri appeared. The occupation of the rigattieri is a street vendor that also greatly influenced the era of the Renaissance. The Renaissance is a period where, in European history, that marks the transition from the Middle Ages to modernity around the 15th to the 16th centuries. So there's a very specific difference between the rigattieri, or that occupation at that time, and now the second-hand retailers, which is that the rigattieri didn't buy old or worn-out clothes, but revalued garments made with used clothing. And for them to market these garments, they must be in good conditions, so they could maintain their value and last for at least a couple of years more. Right now, with the fashion that is being produced right now, we don't see that anymore. So also, exchanges of second-hand clothing have also been recorded during the 16th and 17th century in Venice, where the term strazzaruoli indicated the class of the guild that dealt with second-hand clothing in Venice. I researched this term, and it doesn't exist anymore. So it was, of course, a very old, used in very old Italian language, so it's not current anymore. But it refers to the trade unions, or how they organized to sell second-hand clothing. Also, the guild had to register and follow regulations because many unsophisticated or illegal activities were related to this trade. So, for example, the Strazzaruoli was supposed to sell second-hand clothes only to registered stores or public markets, or from these stores, due to the fact that guild authorities had to control second-hand clothes exchanges. Also, health officials restricted these transactions because it was believed that second-hand clothing would spread the plague. However, these unregistered vendors, which were street vendors or corrupt street registered vendors, either resold clothing anyway or profited from prohibited fabrics. So the record indicates that despite these restrictions, second-hand exchanges were essential sources for clothing between Florentines and Venetians before clothing was produced in large quantities and became cheap. So this is pre-industrial revolution. Now a few facts about the period of the industrial revolution. In the early times of this period, before mass production fully satisfied the population's needs, the second-hand clothing shops flourished and became common in England with the increasing abundance of materials. But the second-hand clothing was traded in irregular, informal, or small-scale transactions using word-of-mouth advertising that built a reputation. The second-hand clothing trade was widespread in London and other major cities, around the early 18th century due to its increasing demand from the poorest population. Like in the Renaissance era, second-hand clothing was an alternative option to new clothing that was only accessible to the highest social classes. Again, so the second-hand clothing was in high demand by poor and the rich too, because it came from very well done fabrics, right? So it still was good, very, very good clothing in demand for both social classes. So merchants during the Industrial Revolution also were unregulated, but there are several salvaged criminal records providing useful information and historical accounts from even before the 1800s that this trade was going on. At this time, vendors used integrity and honesty schemes for profit, but in reality they would engage in criminal and illegal operations. They operated in small-scale businesses and unstructured business transactions. Also, through historical evidence, it's been shown that various irregular types of second-hand clothing exchanges had been carried out by statesmen, hairdressers, tailors, pawn shops, and even legally constituted store owners. So because there was a lot of profit, even if they had other businesses, they would trade second-hand clothes under the table. Various products such as dresses, wigs, accessories, corsets, and even stolen clothing and funeral clothes were altered and repaired for long-term use. This is what we know now as upcycling, right? So these trade networks spread throughout London and to the metropolitan areas and circulated all across the nation. Also in the southern area of the Netherlands during this time, the products that were traded, the second-hand goods, were kitchen utensils mainly, and then followed by clothing, bedding, furniture, and luxury items. This is very interesting. Bedding was one of the most expensive items among the second-hand items traded. For example, it is said that they could cost from 5 to 10 guilders, and considering that a gold ring cost 5 guilders at that time, bedding was really, really a very luxurious item, and sometimes even they would exchange it for dowries. The dowries when the daughter of somebody is going to get married, then they have properties and money to give to the daughter and the new husband, because they got married. So imagine they would exchange bedding for the dowries. The active second-hand clothing business were also widespread in Madrid, Spain, and prevailed during the 18th century. So here what happened is that the influx of workers increased the size of the city, and society became more complex, leading to social polarization and divergent demands from two-tier social classes. Now the post-industrial revolution period. This flow of exchanges changed long after the Industrial Revolution, although the second-hand trade in London peaked around the mid-19th century. So at the end of the 19th century, the number of shops decreased by half, coinciding with an increased number of ready-to-made garments, and because they offered much more variety and lowered prices. So this also coincided with the emerging social class of women, female women that were workers capable of paying for their own clothes, for new clothes, and as a symbol of pride in their abilities and their independence. So the ready-made clothing was sufficient to meet these demands for young women as well as for the general population. Here also the development of the spinning wheel, it was invented before, but here it was developed into a more industrial capacity. So this increased the number of, decreased the number of exchanges of second-hand clothes. So this new machine was capable of converting wool and cotton and other clothes into thread of poor quality that allowed all clothes to be recycled and played an important part on the production of ready-made garments. So with the advancements of technology also, capable of producing ready-made garments and recycling yarn, used clothing was welcome only by poor families who could alter their clothing. So this ready-to-wear clothing now is currently overwhelming the market because it exists everywhere. I mean, who cannot buy new clothes just about in every corner of the world? So this level of consumption has led to a current waste disposal crisis facing many developed and undeveloped countries, because only a small portion of this disposable of unwanted clothing is donated or exported. Some of it is donated to Africa and other Arab countries, but also to Central America and other countries in Latin America. So the meaning of the wearing of the second-hand clothes has changed since the 1990s, coinciding with new fashion styles like retro and revival, and also of the styles of the 1970s. This attitude, the new attitude of wearing vintage clothes is now chic, is now elegant, and it is different from what it was before, that because it was related to poverty. It was basically you had to wear old clothes or second-hand because there was not the possibility, right? So now this trend is also influenced because consumers recognize the importance of second-hand clothing when it comes to sustainability issues. For example, this jacket is made, I bought it in Goodwill and it cost $4, you know. So one of the sustainability issues is, for example, all the resources that were used to make this. When this exchanges owners, all the resources like the materia prima, how you say that? All the resources from the earth that, you know, the crop and the fabric and the time and the energy, all of that does not need to be used again. You know, all these resources are already used to produce something like this when this exchanges owners. So there's a huge opportunity economically and also environmentally for the second-hand clothing market. And next week I'm going to share with you some initiatives. I interviewed recently the owner of Redress. She has a platform that, you know, you're going to be able to exchange clothes depending on the type of clothes. You're going to, you know, you give you one and you get one, and, you know, I'll explain to you. But it's very interesting because more and more initiatives like that are being created. And I mentioned last week that hopefully this helps to reduce also the fast fashion market, which is basically clothes that we wear to dispose almost after one or two times that we wear them. So I will see you next week. Thank you so much for being with me. Remember, you can see all of my broadcast on Facebook and on YouTube, so stay tuned. Thank you so much for being here.